Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone is doing absolutely great. We all are almost at the end of our course, and we have seen the financial feasibility, market feasibility, how to actually calculate the market feasibility, and how to calculate the financial feasibility, how to uh, see that what potential market are we going to actually select for our product or the service, and how can we actually offer them competitive prices so that we can actually compete in the market. We have also seen the risk and its mitigation and its analysis, and how can we actually avoid the potential risks. And we have also seen that how can we actually come up with the complex decision. So today, what we are going to actually do is, which is something very important, and most of the time, uh, people ask that how can they actually create the funds for their venture. So today, what we are going to do is, as you can see the title, which is funding the venture. So when we talk about funding the venture, we actually have a couple of things with us. We actually have debt or the equity financing, which I had been actually talking about all the way along in the financial feasibility. That if you want to actually have a capital structure, this debt and the equity that actually defines the capital structure. So if you want to actually start up a business, first you need to actually decide that whether the capital structure of your venture is going to be based upon entirely on the debt, or the equity, or maybe you want to actually create a certain amount of an equity or the certain amount of the financing. When we were actually discussing this the debt equity in capital structure, we actually discussed that it is always better to have the equity rather than the debt from the bank. So because when you are going to have an equity, it's going to actually benefit more than one people. And when it's about the debt, when you are actually turning back the amount to the bank or any of the loan giving agency, you are actually going to give a certain amount of a markup on that amount. Whereas when you're talking about the equity, you're not going to get any sort of markup on the equities. Both the debt and the equity, they are one of the key benefits. You can actually go for the debt as well as the equity. Then factors affecting the type of financing, availability of the funds, assets of the venture, prevailing interest rates. And this prevailing interest rates, they actually specifically talk about the loans that you actually get from the bank or the loan giving agency, which usually are the banks. See, right now, all financing requires some level of equity. Amount will vary by nature and the size of the venture. So it totally depends that how much of the amount does the shareholders have. That is what it actually means. That you might have to actually. We will actually look forward, look into this thing in the coming slides. That you have to actually put some of the assets or pledge some of the assets when you're actually getting loans, and etc. Uh, there are two types of funding. One is basically internal, and the second one is external funds. Internally generated funds are basically most frequent employed source, which are basically your profits. The way we were discussing today about your projects, that where should your profit or where should your income, which you have actually generated from the first year, that should actually go. So if you have actually generated some income out of the first year, you should actually employ that income into the circulation, and you can actually invest it further into your business. This is exactly what we had been actually discussing today in the live session as well. So the profits, the sales of assets, little used assets, working capital reduction, accounts received. So these are all the internal, which are then the short-term internal source funds are basically reducing the short-term assets, inventory, cash, and other working capital. So when you actually reduce the short-term assets, which is the inventory or the cash or the working capital, you tend to actually save the amount so that you can actually use that amount for the funding purposes. Then there is an extended payment term for the suppliers. You actually make a contract with the suppliers where you actually have terms and conditions employed on them, and from there you can actually save the money and then invest that money into your business. Then criteria of evaluating the external sources and the funds is basically the length of time the funds are available, costs involved, and then amount of the company control lost. Basically, the external sources are basically the ones which are actually uh, coming from outside the company. So you need to actually be very careful that uh, the amount of the cost that you will be paying uh, as a markup, because when you're talking about the external funds, it's not necessary that the external funds are basically they might be your the equity holders. Somebody might actually give you the amount of the money so that they can become a shareholder, right? But there has to be a cost involved in that, right? Similarly, when you actually have taken a loan from the bank, obviously there has to be a cost involved in that. You have to then pledge your some asset to the bank so that you can actually get that much amount of the money. Which now that asset is basically an equivalent amount to what you are getting from the bank. So if you don't give the bank the markup that they require, and you actually fail to get that loan given back to the bank, obviously the asset that you have actually pledged will be given to the bank. So in that case, what's actually happening is you are actually losing your asset which was pledged to the bank. So obviously there is a cost involved in that, right? So same as this amount of the company control loss, that also means the amount of because when you are asking somebody to give a certain amount of the money based upon the shares, and somebody is buying the shares in your company, obviously you will be losing a certain amount of the control over the company. This is basically the fact that if you want to be in control, the majority of the shares should be on your side, right? But if somebody else gets the even the half amount of the shares, they do have a strong hold on the company, and they will be involved in the decision making of that company. So you need to be a little careful when you actually are taking the equity, when you are actually asking for the shares, for the amount in the shape of the shares, or you are actually taking the loan from the bank. So in both the cases, there is a trade-off. So then there are personal funds, which is actually the least expensive in terms of cost and control. This actually means that you are putting your own savings into your business as a funding, right? So this is the most common type of the fund, which is actually the personal fund. Then there is a family and the friends. Obviously the family can fund you, the friends can actually fund you. You can actually give back the money to your friends and the families whenever it's possible, and it's absolutely markup free. Some of the friends might want to actually put them as a shareholder as well. So there is no harm in that as well, right? So the advantage is basically easy to obtain the money, more patient than the other investors. I mean, this is very obvious. And the disadvantage is direct input into the operations of the venture, right? So keep this thing in mind that any of the friends who would actually become a shareholder of your company would actually be a business partner. So when it comes to the business, they will be actually talking to you as a business partner, a partner rather than a friend, right? So that's what it means. So a formal agreement must be included, which is the amount of the money involved in both the parties. If they are actually any of the friends or the family members, they are actually investing in your business. and there has to be everything written. The terms and conditions, the contracts, they have to be made irrespective of this thing, whoever is funding, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend. So one should actually know that how much amount of the money the other person has actually given you, and in the return, what does that person want, right? So that has to be actually written down, and that has to be legally followed. Then there are the commercial banks. The type of the loans that they usually give is the accounts receivable loans. I mean, inventory loans. By inventory, you want to actually for the if you want to actually go ahead for the sales, you can actually get the loans for that. If you want to purchase any equipment, any real estate, and want to actually develop an asset on that, you can actually get a loan on that. Then same is the case with the cash flows financing, which is a conventional bank loans like installment loans and the straight commercial loans, long-term loans, and character loans. Now, these are different types of the loans that you can actually get from the commercial bank. But usually what the banks do is that when they are actually giving you a certain amount of the money as a loan, what they want to do is they want to actually pledge something which is an equivalent of the amount that they are giving you. For example, if they are giving you around maybe 5 million, right? So they want actually something in return to be pledged, which actually costs 5 million, maybe a certain amount of a plot, maybe a certain amount of a building, or maybe a car, maybe. I mean, they actually assess you through the number of the assets that you have, and you can actually pledge those assets against the amount that you're getting from the bank, and against that amount, against those pledged property or maybe the assets that you have, they actually give you the amount that you want. So if you are unable to return the amount along with the uh, uh, the the markup, right? So you tend to fail the return. You tend to fail to return the amount of the money to the bank. So the bank is then they have all the rights to actually get that property or get that asset that you had actually pledged to the bank. So that is the biggest disadvantage over here when you actually go for the banks. So banks usually actually decide according to the 5 C's, which is actually character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. I mean, these things actually contain the same concept that actually I have recently talked about. Review the past financial statement and the future projections, whether you really can actually give the amount back to them or not. That is what the future financial statements actually show. The past financial statements actually show. This actually shows that you had not been uh, you have not been broken before, and the statement actually shows that the cash flow over the period of time had was actually stable enough, so that you don't actually go towards the bankruptcy, right? Then questions are asked regarding the ability to repay the loan. This is very obvious. So moving onwards, then there are government grants. Now the government grants generally, this is something which is actually written otherwise, but we don't have this small business innovation research. So this usually probably it might be in US. But the government grants are something which actually the government offers. For example, if the previous government and this government, they actually launched, the Prime Minister business loan. So the previous government actually had launched this Prime Minister's business loan, whereas this government also had, taken the proposals, and they had actually given the funds in Prime Minister, small business loans. So what they had done is that they actually they wanted a brief description about the business, and what then they actually define a certain eligibility criteria, and they actually see the proposals, and they see the entrepreneurial potential in those proposals, then they have a focus on either the women, where there's 50% loan should be actually given to the women, or maybe a certain age group, or maybe certain demographic uh, um, has to be defined, that this much amount of the loan has to be given to these people. Then the debt equity ratio is basically 90 10, which means that the 90 actually goes to the person who actually uh, uh, basically a debt equity ratio is basically 90 to 10, which actually says that uh, in 8 years, one the tenure is for the 8 years, and the first year is the grace period, then easy monthly installments for the 7 years. Then the pricing is basically 8% fixed for the borrower, but the government will pay the difference of the 7% of any of the charges. Then refinancing is State Bank of Pakistan to explore providing 50% of uh, uh, refinance at the risk of the participating bank. Risk mitigation is that the government will share 50% of the losses, subject to the maximum 10% of the loan amount. Number of the loans are basically 100,000, which is for the fiscal year of 2013 and 2014. So this is pretty old now, right? Then the size of the loan is zero point 0.1 million to 2.0 million. I mean, this is just an example. You can see Prime Minister's loan over the internet, and you will actually find out what actually is available right now. And then there is another sort of technological. Uh, mm, uh, Ignite is one of the very good sources which can actually fund you for the commercialization perspective. They can actually give you the seed money for starting up a venture. Though. Similarly, they want to actually, if you have any research project which you think it should be funded, you can actually apply to Ignite, and Ignite can actually tell you, see, they'll go through your proposal, and they'll comment on that, and if they like the proposal and the commercial aspect of it, then certainly they are going to actually fund your proposal, as well as they might actually help you in financing initial finances for your venture. Then procedure is simple. You just apply. You look out for the website, and you apply on that website. Through that website, there'll be a certain form. You just fill in the form, and justify that you are going to actually generate a certain amount of revenue, and you are actually going to help Pakistan economically grow. So if they like the idea, they'll certainly approve it. Now, then there are private placements, like type of investors. Investors can influence nature and the direction of the business. Then maybe involved in the business operations. Entrepreneurs need to consider degree of involvement. Um, Private offerings, which is a formalized method of for obtaining the funds from private investors. You go, and what happens is you actually go to the private investors, you pitch the idea in front of them, and they like the idea and they see the scope of that project further into the market, they certainly fund your project. Then there is bootstrap financing. Now, bootstrap is basically something which comes usually, which actually is comes from your own pocket, though, right? So basically, it's basically something which generally a person spends by himself for a certain project. Usually takes between 3 to 6 months to raise. Then often decreases the firm's drive for the sales and the profit. Reason being, because you're the one who is actually spending the money on it, and it might actually decrease the company's flexibility to actually produce that much amount of the orders which are generally required in the market. It actually creates a little bit of a problem for the venture, because there is a limited amount of the financing that can be actually arranged in this case, because there's nothing as such outsourced to somebody else. that there is a crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is practice of funding a project or a venture by raising a small amounts of money from a larger number of people, specifically from the internet. Right. So what you do is you generally generate a model or an idea, and you float that idea over the internet, and then people actually look at that idea. You must have seen many videos on Facebook. Uh, those prototypes are not generally as such available in the market. That product is not generally available in the market. Maybe there is a prototype though, but that that is a concept which one actually gives and floats over the social media. So the people who are actually interested in that social media, that product, they generally fund that product. So uh, this is actually what it means. So there are different types of crowdfunding. You float the idea, and you actually make the pre-sales. So if you make a product, you have made the pre-sales. Now, the amount of generated from the pre-sale means the product isn't there. You just have put the concept model over there, and the people have booked the products prior to its development. The amount generated from those pre-sales are basically then used for the development of the product, and this is exactly what a reward-based crowdfunding means. Then there is an equity based. I mean, then what you do is you actually generate an amount of, you generate an amount by putting an idea, and then you ask the people to actually contribute in it. And anyone who's actually contributing in it, they generally have a reward in form of an equity. That whenever that product is going to get launched into the market, and the market is going to actually accept that product, that product is actually the amount that the company is going to receive would actually provide give a certain amount of equity to the person who had actually funded for that product. So in this case, if you're working based upon the equity, you tend to actually have a lot of shareholders across the board, right, across the globe. Because you are actually doing is you are getting a small amount of the money from many people across the globe, right? So that is what an equity-based crowdfunding is. Then there is a donation-based. Now the donation-based is basically you ask for the donations. There is no certain amount of the reward or an equity involved in it, and what you do is you ask for a donation, and generally from those donations you actually develop that product and benefit the customers. You must have seen some of the websites which actually give the free services to the people, but they actually ask for the certain amount of the funding to the people, so that they can actually fund that a certain organization to develop that website, give out their free services to the people. Okay, so that is based on the donations. Okay. Then there are joint ventures. Joint ventures are usually it's actually also known as when this happens when two of the parties, they actually come into an agreement to actually start one single venture. So this is basically, and both the parties generally have a certain amount of the share in that. So that is basically what a joint venture is. So a joint venture comes. It may grow over the period of time, but generally it comes to an end when your project actually comes to an end. So it's basically a task based or a project based. It may actually go up to certain projects that you have completed those certain projects together. So, for example, if you have a certain expertise in a certain area, and another party has an expertise in another area, and you actually join your hands together to actually develop something which requires both the expertise, uh, you actually come up with a joint venture. They will actually provide their own expertise, and you will provide your own expertise to actually join them together to give one product into the market. And both of you will actually get benefited with this joint venture, right? Joint venture may also come, to an end if both the parties have a certain amount of dispute during this time. Then there may be actually a dispute between the profits, and they actually may actually have a dispute in an agreement. They might not actually come to an agreement at certain point of time, but the profits and the losses are generally shared by the co-ventures equally. Then advantages are to reduce the risk in the business, increase the competitive strength, possible to use advanced technologies for the desired tasks, provides the benefits of scales of economy. And then the disadvantages are functioning adversely affected because the lack of understanding, because there has no specific agreement. So if you are going into the joint venture, you must have a written agreement between both the parties, that what exactly they will be offering during the venture and what benefit will they be getting when it comes to the revenue, right? Then there are legal restrictions in this. Equity may differ from co-venture to co-venture. So it totally depends that what you are offering to within that venture. Then the mergers. Uh, Mergers actually are more of an absorption technique of one firm into another. So if there is a larger firm, they actually uh, they actually um, join together in such a way that uh, both the firms start working together on the same thing, and they get one of the firm gets absorbed into another firm. Then it is known as a merger. It's basically external growth strategy. Horizontal mergers are same type of products are or the market is added into existing ones, right? Then the vertical is basically complementary products and services are added up to existing products. For example, shirt. But generally, what happens is that, assumingly, one is don't confuse this mergers with the acquisitions, because sometimes when the companies they acquire another company, for example, Mobilink, they actually acquired Warid, right? So acquisitions are actually different from mergers. Mergers, the companies do not actually lose their ownership as that of acquisition. So in mergers, the companies actually retain their ownerships, but they actually merge together actually, and they get absorbed within one another. Actually fund get the better funding and get it going in the market. Whereas they might actually keep on working on the same thing. Then an enterprise enters into the business related to its present one in terms of technology marketing of the both like Nor Cubes and the Nor Noodles, maybe, right? Then conglomerate mergers are not related to already existing business, Engro produces fertilizers as well as the juices and the names of products, right? Then advantages are to provide the benefits of the economies of the scale, and then facilitate the better use of the resources, the sick enterprise into the healthy enterprise. This means actually any of the firm which actually is not performing very well gets absorbed into the firm which actually is working well in the market. So in those terms, when a sick firm is merged into a healthy firm, both the firms get stable and they get a larger amount of the revenue. Now, the disadvantage is the large scale of operations, with more coordination is required, and the mergers lead to a monopoly, right? Okay, so I believe you have understood so far that what are the different types of fundings. So this lecture ends now. If you have any queries, just let me know either through WhatsApp or maybe we can have. We're definitely going to have a Thursday session at 10 o'clock in the morning. Um, if you have any queries, do let me know. Till that time, Allah Hafiz, and take very good care of yourself.